Behind the Shades.
Oh man, I look back and this is gonna date this episode, but I like it because it's like reflective. I
Mm,
look back and it's just been sad.
mm.
It's been
Yeah,
sad. But there's happiness. There's happiness to be found this year,
man, you
right?
got to look for
So
it a little harder these days, right? I mean, this is the ever ongoing cycle, the yin and the yang, right,
yeah.
of life, and the the trying to find the places of like good and highlights, and in the midst of so many things that are just really atrocious and not going well in our little world of ours. But yeah, what are some of your highlights from this past year?
Um this, to be very honest, like if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have the friendship we have.
Right? Yeah.
Right. If it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have a similar friendship with a few other people who come onto my show every couple months just to speak about what's going on with the life. Like the first interview was very, how are you? This and that. Or you went through this, you went through that. That was just a conversation between two friends who live in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Um, Another highlight is that I think I've always appreciated what was important, but I'm putting new value to what is important, and I appreciate it a little bit more. I'm more protective of my time and my
Mm-hmm.
energy and
Mm-hmm.
those who I give it to versus I wanted to be like Facebook and social media. I wanted 1,000 friends. I wanted to have friends to party, friends who could loan me money, friends I can just talk with. Now, and I hate to say this because I'm going to sound like my grandparents. Now that I've got older,
Yeah. Yeah.
I realize it's all about the friends that I can count on my two lovely and strong hands. So
Yeah.
it's a different
I got a
vibe.
fortune cookie the other day, Terrain, that said it's not the quantity of friends you have, but the quality. And I too am finding that. Like as I get older, I have fewer people around me. I still have a lot of different kinds of connections, but I spend way more time focusing on those relationships that really feel critical and important. And I can still enjoy those kind of other friendships that are a little bit more on the periphery, but don't feel as much obligation to like make it happen or make sure we're seeing each other as often as I used to. Yeah, I can feel that too.
And one thing I did notice is I thought I would feel bad, but I don't
Mm.
feel bad. And is
Mm.
that selfish of me to think that I don't feel bad?
No, 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 no. I mean, this is, I think, one of the gifts of getting older. You start giving less of a fuck about
Yeah,
things, right?
that's exactly what it is.
Okay,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah,
could
you
say,
just
yeah.
like, hey, I am what I am, and I'm gonna stop fighting that, and taking care of me is okay. I had a client the other day who's been doing a lot of really deep work around prioritizing herself this past year, and her like biggest gain has been like, I love you, but I love me more. And in that space, I'm going to be okay, like taking care of myself, putting myself first, and not see it through the lens of like it's selfish or it's wrong or it's bad. Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect way to be, especially when you start to, because now 40s and 50s, depending on how you feel and what you do, that's not old anymore.
No, I know, right?
You
There's a lot of
know,
life still ahead.
still a lot of life. The only difference is if you want to have children, that's a different type of conversation, especially your
Mm-hmm.
first. But if you're just living life for yourself and you are free,
Mm-hmm.
you can be as young as you want to be because you're being as young as you feel you want to be as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Those are some great highlights. Any others that are coming to mind?
Um, I'm trying to think without revealing too much because,
Oh,
well, you're my friend, so I'm
what?
actually
You're
in the
gonna hold back on
process. I know, right? Of all people, not you, but I started the path to getting certified as a coach.
me? Yes.
So I
Amazing.
finally did it.
Yes.
I
Woo-hoo. I'm
finally did
excited
it.
about that for
Yes. Yeah.
you.
I'm excited. So I've started it, and by the time this probably comes out, I would probably have been finished. But um, I look like I'm the youngest in my class.
Oh, baby face. All
I
right.
know, right? I have to make sure, I'm not coloring the grays anymore, right?
Yeah.
Let the grays out. No, I'm just joking. But one thing I did realize is that it's people from different walks of life. You have people, different culture, different
Sure.
jobs, careers. Um, they were surprised that someone in finance would want to be a coach, to help people through their traumas and their anxiety. And I told them I coach people when it comes to finance, the customers, and I coach people on delivering um, feedback and delivering solutions that would help them in their life. So why not do it for those who have experienced what you and I have experienced, and grow that network, because we're connected now in that way. Like, we both want to help people. You're doing it your way, I'm doing it my way. Why not just connect that community like you and I are connected anyways?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's exciting. So we'll be starting a business. You'll be becoming more of an entrepreneur than you already are, leaning into your expertise and your excellence and your gifts. Yeah, taking up space. You ready for it?
I am. And then I can get my LLC like you did and be on your level, dye my hair red, and
Hey, come on.
we're good to go, right?
Twinsies. I love it. Yes. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Wow. Well, I'm so excited for you and thrilled for that. And of course, anything I can do to support you in that process. I remember back in 2007 when I was just, kind of going through a divorce and trying to think about like next steps and becoming really geared up about, healing myself, and became really focused on that. I had like the baby ideas, the like kind of an inkling of what beyond surviving might be. And that year I kind of used another workbook, which is a great book, but it's faith-based. And I knew eventually I wanted to like create something that could be accessible for people, regardless of whether they, believed in God or not. And then when I started to step into like the business side of like the world of coaching and like figuring all of that out, it took me from about 2017 to 2014 before I was able to go full time as a coach. And I think that process could have been a little bit accelerated, but it was kind of learning the business acumen. Like that was a real stretch exercise for me, because I knew what I wanted to do when it came to like the content of what I wanted to teach, like the curriculum, if you will, and the work. I understood the work very deeply and intuitively, but the like, how do I really reach my audience and how do I connect, and like all the little, like you end up wearing 5 million different hats, Train, right? Like your CEO, your marketer, you've got to be the newsletter copy editor, like all of these different moving parts to take on. But it's kind of um the beauty of being an entrepreneur is you get to make all of these sorts of decisions and really create something that's yours at the end of the day.
And that's many good points you've made, because I think sometimes, or some people, they'll look at you and they see the finished product or more polished and refined product, and they're like, okay, I can do that. No, you got to put in some long hours. And as you mentioned, you're wearing a lot of hats, because if it doesn't succeed in one area or altogether, it is on you. You can't look at John in a couple of desks down and be like, well,
Right.
John, it's all your fault.
That guy, it's that guy over there. Don't look at me. I know. Keep looking at yourself in the mirror. Like, so you didn't do any of your marketing today. What are we going to do about that? Right. Like, yeah, that hustle piece. And thankfully, like what's really beautiful about where I am now, like going on 15 years in, so many parts of that are now, I call it like the business machine. They've been developed. And so there's always fine tuning. Like you never get to just leave it and let it set forever. Like I'm just now going through a process of like updating, some of my processes, but a lot of the things are set. So now I can breathe a little easier, and it's a little bit more upkeep and just staying on top of things, trying to stay up to date. Okay, I'm going to totally like turn a corner here. Are you doing any of this Instagram like world? I cannot decide like how to engage. I really feel like an 80-year-old woman when I'm on Instagram. I'm like, wait, what? How do you do? I don't understand it. It is feels so above my head. I'm just like, this is where I need to outsource something. I need to get some young 20 something to come in here and work with it. But that's what I mean. Like there are all these like points of growth alongside now things that are just really settled. So I can have a little bit more, just like less hustle and more focusing on my clients and the work and me. Yeah. Taking naps. It's great.
One thing I
That's one of
did,
my
since
highlights
you,
this year.
yeah, since you mentioned Instagram, I couldn't figure it out. Like when I first started my Instagram, it was just me at the gym because I like fitness.
Mhm.
So I figured out that piece, and that's only because there's so much of that on Instagram. So people go to flock. People will see it just because it's in demand.
It's a big deal. Okay.
But when it came down to narrowing down Instagram to a niche, that escaped me. Like I'm at the point where I figured it out on Facebook, right? Because that's where I get the most traction. I figured it out on the website that I'm using. That's where I get the most traction. YouTube is a little bit different because from my research on YouTube, there's more men on YouTube. So
Really?
yeah, so unless you go that way, that's why you may see, if you're familiar with it and those listening, there's a lot of red pill content. Women are the cause of my misery. Well, I don't want to say cause of my misery. There's a lot of red pill, incel.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
tell me more.
The modern women. I'm a PhD. There's a lot of that, right? And then on the flip side, there's the women combating that. Well, we can wait until we're 40, 50 to have a child. And you're like, we don't need to be married. It's, we could just live together like the Golden Girls. There's a lot of that because everyone's going to be Blanche, right? So there's a lot of that.
I thought it would be Betty White's character. She's fabulous. She's so hilarious. Oh my gosh.
But I think Facebook is more about the family, right?
Yeah,
like if you have your Facebook, you connect with the cousins in a different country, your family in different countries. There's a lot more of that. With Instagram, at this point, to be honest with you, Rachel, I'm just going to be using that as my escape. You ever have that time where you just want to be silly?
Yes.
Be silly on Instagram.
Yeah.
Keep that to your silly point because you're doing well enough. If you want to outsource it, by all means, you can have like a specific business page and you can have your personal where you're flipping your red hair and you're dancing. You're like, oh my God, this song gets me going. Things like that. But because we all need that outlet. We all need that outlet.
I think it's such an interesting, place that we try to find, for me, finding the balance between almost like behind the curtain, like my life behind the curtain, and then my life as, seen on TV, if you will, all of the different platforms. And there has to be enough transparency, especially in the work that I do, that people have, a strong sense of who I am. And I enjoy that to a certain extent, but I do find like having internal conversations with myself about like, is that private? Is that public? And, wanting to try to figure out like which things are like, that's really just for me. I don't have to put that into an Instagram post or whatever, or Facebook post. And finding that balance has been, part of that journey too. Goodness.
It's tough. It is tough. It's tough because you don't want one to overstep the other, basically.
Yeah.
And it is tough because there's some things you want to keep to yourselves, but there's sometimes those private things, once you release them, you don't know who you'd reach.
Right. Yeah.
What if there's someone that wants to know Rachel outside of the LLC? Like they want to know, does Rachel actually enjoy a movie? Does she laugh? I think we spent especially the last 2 years. I know we touched on that the last time we spoke. We spent the last 2 years being too serious.
Yeah.
Too serious, right? We want to protect ourselves in ways that we didn't even think about before, right? You stay over there, you stay here. If you don't have a piece of paper, you can't even come outside. But I think we just need to figure out. I gave this example. Someone interviewed. I gave this example. I was driving my family member, to the hospital. Nothing life-threatening. I saw 2 kids running. These kids are running up and down like kids do. Like we probably did when we were young, right?
Sure.
They fell. All of a sudden you're like, oh, two kids have fallen. They looked at each other. They started laughing. Giggling. And they got back up and they started running some more. When was the last time we did something silly?
But legit, let me tell you something. The other day, I fell. There's no bouncing back up at 45. You got to take it. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a slow process of getting back up. So there's some youth. Youth helps some of that. But you're right. We got to like find that in ourselves, find our vitality and our youthfulness and our playfulness, and relax a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all for that. And you're right. You know, I seen some people fall. It seems funnier. When it's an older person falling, it just seems more funny. Yeah. And I feel bad when I laugh. So sometimes I'll turn my face away, like, you know, and you laugh in your chest or in your arm. Like it's like a sneeze, right? But, you know, because that's how we're doing it these days, right? But
Great.
But you want that. You want that because being an adult is stressful enough. Being an adult entrepreneur is stressful enough. Being an adult entrepreneur and a parent is stressful enough, right? Like we all say that we want to be young forever, but we don't behave like we want to be young forever. We just want to live forever doing things that may not bring us the most joy. And that's where I find it's a lot to deal with. And it's unfortunate because it's tough out there. It's tough.
So I want to read you something. So the other day, just yesterday, I went to here in San Francisco at the DeYoung Museum. There's an exhibit of Judy Chicago's work. Are you familiar with her at all? Have you ever come across her artwork?
I have not, but tell me about it, please.
Google her, check her out. So Judy Chicago is, primarily known as a feminist artist. And she, was really the beginnings of her work were kind of like in the 70s, certainly very dominant in the 80s, but she's continuing, to do work today, even, she's into her 80s. And her most present day work was really, there was this kind of series of etchings on black glass and exploring death. But I want to just read, so she writes, so she does the image and then she'll write, and she says, in 1947, Albert Camus, I'm not sure, said, "Some of us feel such a desperate weariness, a weariness from which nothing remains to set us free except death." And what you were just saying there just made me think about that, and I particularly took a picture of that because I think I've been feeling that a lot this year, like weariness and, all of the stresses and pressures around like taking care of my mom and trying to navigate that. I don't know if I've talked about that on the show, but my mom is 85. She has Alzheimer's. She's in a nursing home in St. Louis. And, the degree of like neglect and like teetering on abuse, right? And trying to get resources for her and get people at the facility to respond and just do their actual jobs, it's just exhausting and daunting and like everything that's happening in our world, and it seems like we're going backwards in, a lot of ways, and that weariness. And so we can be very easily consumed by that. And so how do we press through and how do we find that balance? Like, we're kind of talking about like, how do we stay tapped into youthfulness and joy and vitality, even as sometimes it does feel like life is wearing us down. Yeah.
I agree. And I feel bad that you're going through what you're going through with your mother. To lose one's mind or to start to lose one's mind is one of the scariest things for me. And I could just imagine someone who is going through it, because I know quite a bit of the illness of Alzheimer. I know how it impacts people. And some days you won't even recognize the person
Yeah.
because of their behavior. And when they look at you, they don't know who you are.
They don't know you. Yeah.
They don't know you. So I think as a world, we need to seriously pay attention to mental health, because not only of what your mother is going through, but you as the caregiver, you're going through your own battle just doing that. Put away the outside world for a minute. Taking care of someone who's going through something like that is not easy.
Right.
So I can imagine the difficulty that you're going through, especially when the professionals, there's that struggle because they're going through what they're going through too. Because
Oh
to
man.
be on the front lines in the last couple of years, I could just imagine the overload for them, right? So this is
Yep.
not me minimizing what everyone, what your mother is going through. It's just you have the facility stressed. You have your mother going through what you're going through. You have you what you're going through as well. Put that all in one jar. What is the expectation now?
Exactly. Yeah, we're all stretched too thin. I mean, and it's, such a overall crisis. I mean, you can get very philosophical about it. It has a lot to do with like how we think about elders, I think, particularly in the States. I think it has a lot to do with families becoming, less the core or the center and becoming more, stretched and spread out and less connected. And there's that. We have a healthcare crisis, like, no doubt. Like, just the systems that are in place for even getting resources are really broken. And, the people in the facility who are responsible for providing the day-to-day care, they're undervalued, they're underpaid, they're overworked, even before the pandemic, right? And then double, down on that. And you have these, like the company that oversees my mom's facility, make billions of dollars in their coffers. And you can't, make sure that somebody's there, getting her dressed every day, right? So there are these huge gaps, and you feel like you're battling an entire system, and you can't do that, or at least I can't. So, like, what can I do? And trying to focus on the day to day. And a lot of times that's just, in the work of trauma healing that I do, in life in general, when we're facing very big things, it almost always for me comes down to, like, what's my best next step? Like, what's the smallest next thing that I can do to try to address the situation or the problem? And yeah, Terrain, like, this has been going on. I mean, my mom was diagnosed, I want to say in 2005. No, that's not right. That's not right. 2000, like maybe 17, 18. But the process of watching that deterioration, like, you go through, I was struggling for a really long time until a coach colleague of mine defined it for me and labeled it as pre-grieving. I was like, wow, yeah, that's a really good way to think about this, because you're grieving the loss of the person, even though they're physically still alive, the relationship or being known by that person, the experiences, the memories are, and then, feeling disempowered by a system that makes it so very difficult. For it feels like just the basics. Could we just get the basics handled, you know? Oh, goodness me. So that's been tough this year, and it's, kind of escalated, and as she's getting older. And for me, there's also the layer of frustration with my siblings, who are just not engaged at all. And so, like, I every once in a while have this, like, redhead eruption of anger. I'm like, motherfucker, like, I just get so resentful, right? Like, it's on me. I'm the baby, and, like, I'm the youngest, and it makes me so angry at times that they just basically have checked out, like, no, we're not going to deal with that. We're not going to, it's too hard for us to face. So I have to work with that too, right?
I think we have to start going back to building the community. And as you mentioned, it starts
Yeah.
with the immediate family. And as sad as I am to say this, as saddened as I am to say this, there's when you have two or more children, from like the parents have two or more children, there's always that one that is going to be there. And unfortunately, there's that one, maybe two, that is not going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe because they didn't have that connection with the parent growing up. Maybe something has happened. Who really knows? But the way I live my life, and I think a way a lot of people should be living their life, if you are not there for someone in need, when you're in need, don't expect anyone to be there for you.
Yeah.
Because that's fair. Right?
Yeah. This is also though why it's right. I do need to have my Golden Girls commune. I don't have any babies, right? So maybe my nephew will like pop up and like take care of me in my old age. But yeah, like how do we like there's this like new for me, I think a lot about like how do I form a family outside the context of blood relationship, right? Who are the people that I'm really going to be counting on and leaning on, you know, as I get older, you know, to take care of me, because it's not going to be necessarily direct relatives. And like, what a wild thing. I think a lot of people are facing that. A lot of people are navigating that in their lives these days.
I'm in that same position. At 38, I'm in that. I'm starting to piece that together.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to. I know in the movie Hangover they call it a wolf pack where you can go in and do things like that, right? You know, and I guess the women will call it their cougar den. But I'm trying to figure that out myself. I'm trying to. I want the business relationship, right? I want to have, okay, if something happens, I have a doctor that can count on. If I'm in trouble, I have that lawyer. If I need an accountant, I'm building that. But that's business. I can't expect them to be there if I fall, because as you mentioned, right? Sometimes we don't have the youth. We need that. Right. We need to use that cane. You know what I mean? Yes. We need to hold on to that rail. Because for a lot of us, ladies and gentlemen, those listening, when you reach a certain age, that banister on that staircase is life. You
grip it like there's no tomorrow. Like, Lord have mercy.
Yes, you know, it's like you're reaching for the Lord. Lord, give me strength today. Amen. Hallelujah. But I'm in that same process. I'm building up, because if something would happen to you, and I think if something happened to me, we would feel bad. Right? Yeah, but there's enough distance between us that there isn't much that we could do, even if we wanted to be fair. Right. I'm in that same process of building my surroundings. And unfortunately, this goes to our earlier point where we talked about the people I had around me. They weren't the best fit. Yeah. I don't want to say good enough because I'm going to sound bougie, and I'm not bougie for those listening, but they weren't the best fit. For what I needed as I got older, because people make fun of the Golden Girls, but at the end of the day, they can rely on each other.
They had each other. And
they had each other.
And man, and they gave each other shit, but they loved each other and could count on each other. And that's it, you know, that place, that sense of tribe. I mean, it really is about loyalty too, right? People who have that capacity to see it through. And it's and I do have people in my life like that, you know. Right now they're, you know, not here in the immediate area, so it also brings to mind like maybe I need to make a change too, right? Like getting closer in vicinity to the people who I know have my back in that kind of way, as I get older and older. Yeah,
I'm doing that, and I've reached out to certain people, and I check in more. And was interested. I told my friends he's in a different state, right? We call it provinces here, but he's in a different state. We talk probably once a week. Yeah. And I mentioned to him my plan. So what I did to commit to this, I told him I changed my phone plan, my cell phone plan, that my cell phone plan includes long distance. Because in Canada, it was actually extra. But I changed it because I had people that I was close with that were probably maybe an hour or two away traveling. But that's nothing. Yeah. That's nothing these days. But what I want to say is that, and I'll ask you this question, Rachel. I think it's harder today to make connections than it was a few years ago, because we've been disconnected
Mm,
intentionally.
yeah, it's a little trippy. So like one of the ways that I really held community and held a sense of connection in my life was by having a girls' movie night every month. And so, when the pandemic started, we just kind of like nothing, like I don't we don't none of us know what's going on, so it's just canceled, right? And then as it became apparent that this was going to be a long haul process, we moved to like meeting via Zoom for a while, and that was nice, that was okay. But in the last 6 months, for me, like I'm at a place where I'm like, okay, like we know what to do, we've got a little a handle on it enough where like we can hang out in my backyard. For those who are comfortable, you can come sit on my couch. But I've kind of switched back to inviting people over, for what I would call my traditional movie nights, and nobody's up for it. And so there's so much fear. There's so much fear and confusion, about what we can do and what we can't do and what the risks really are. And so, yeah, people have kind of that place of disconnection, and everybody kind of being on different pages and different levels of, risk tolerance. Yeah, I mean, that has played a huge role in, life getting a little bit quieter, smaller, less connected this year for me. Yeah. What have you been noticing about it?
The same thing. It seems that people who are down the street from me, who I actually know, are a world away.
Gosh, yeah.
It's tough. It is tough. Like I have the same people that I connect with, but as you mentioned, there's a difference between I don't. There's a difference between a Zoom meeting and in person.
Yeah.
You can't replace that, right? You can try your best, but what I found is I text and call a lot more to certain people because, as you mentioned, everyone's risk appetite is different, and I think the source of everything these days is the confusion. And some people, when they're confused, they become fearful.
Mhm.
And what I would want ideally is that let's have a conversation. Let's say the women that you had the movies night with, let's say this is our intention. And on my side, I'll say this is our intention. We need to start building back and building up each other because human beings are designed in a way to interact with other human beings.
Yeah.
The way we punish criminals is isolation and disconnection. So
Right.
why would we voluntarily want that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
For those who are
Mhm.
close with us. I have a friend who lives in the same city as me. Sorry, he lives in a neighboring city of me, and he doesn't see anyone. He spends a lot of time online, and he even admits he's going to. I guess there's like this dark side of YouTube with all these conspiracy theories and things like that. And I told him this is going to have an impact on your mind. And the research is already coming out. There's a lot of people who are spending a lot of time by themselves, just roaming the internet, and they're becoming lost in
Mhm.
themselves. And they're not able,
Mhm.
and they fear that they won't be able to navigate in the real world when things come back to a sense of normality.
Yeah. Yeah. Lord have mercy. Oh, what do we do? What do we do? I mean, I love this, like what you're offering here is like it really does begin with like having conversations again and trying to, understand what people's fears are, what people's reservations are, and, try to open a dialogue and like how can we get some semblance of connectivity back and come out. Like it is like it can be so brain numbing when you're just like in your own house watching TV, watching streaming stuff on social media and these sorts of things. you know it doesn't really ignite the same parts of the brain that being in physical presence with another human being does, right? Exactly that. Like we're so wired for connection, like we need it for survival. There's so plenty of studies out there when people are too isolated, it really just causes such a deterioration of self. And I have to be careful about that too. Like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm at home working, and I have a sense of connection with my clients, of course. But if I'm not careful, I can look up and it'll be 3 days and I haven't stepped out of the house, right? So like, it's so easy too, like to fall into that. So gotta like, okay, get your butt up, go walk out. Luckily, I mean, one of the reasons why I love where I live in San Francisco is that it has such a neighborhood feel. I know my neighbors. I know my neighbors 2 doors down, right? Like, people in the neighborhood, there's a coffee shop right at the corner. So people are often just hanging out. I can step out my door and sit down, have a cup of coffee, have a chat, talk about the day. And that has been huge over these, couple of years that we've been, in this mess of a pandemic.
Do you think things are going to change for you in the following year?
I mean, what's true in a lot of ways is that I haven't changed a lot of my behavior. I have a very high risk tolerance. So not too much about my life has actually changed, except for what's been imposed upon me by restrictions, right? And so like, I don't go out to eat as much because, finding a place that has outdoors, and most of the time in San Francisco, the weather's nice, but sometimes it's cold. So, right. I mean, so I think for me, looking ahead to 22, as far as thinking about my, friendships, I think I've just got to find the people who are a little bit more on the same wavelength as I am. And then for those who are a little bit more fearful and less risk tolerant, maybe try to create opportunities to connect with them that, meet them where they're at. Because I haven't been thinking about that very much. I've just been a little bit like, I don't want to deal with that. So maybe I need to have a little more compassion, a little more understanding. And for those relationships that I value with people we don't see necessarily eye to eye on this situation, find out where's the middle of the road so that we don't completely lose those connections. I guess that's what comes to mind. What are you thinking for yourself?
I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking that, well, a few things. One, everyone needs to have an understanding of everyone's situation.
Mm-hmm.
Too many people are spending too much time judging instead of listening.
Yeah.
And two, I think there has to be an honest middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
saying that this is one person's choice, this is another person's choice. Let's meet in the middle. Not this person saying that you're the devil, and this person saying that you're the sheep.
Right.
Basically,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And third is that we need to understand everyone's point of view. But more so, I think we need to remember how things used to be. It seems some people have forgotten. There was a time, I know for those who are listening, this may be in distant memory for you. There was a time where, unless there was a level of intimacy between you and I didn't ask you certain questions. Right? There was a time where I don't have a piece of paper in front of me that I didn't need.
Right.
I didn't need to say, we can be friends. Now, this is not me picking a side or not. I'm just saying that, ladies and gentlemen, for those listening, it wasn't that long ago where you would have a sexual relationship with someone, let's be honest now, and you'd even ask anything.
Right.
You didn't care because you saw him. You're like, oh my God, he's 6'4" and chocolate.
Hello.
I mean, right? Hello. And, you looked at her and you're like, oh my God, are those double D's?
Right.
Come on over here.
Yes. Now we have a pre-screening. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's kind of like, it feels almost dystopian. And like, if we are not mindful Like, what are we going to continue? I really have this conversation with a lot of people here in San Francisco because, there's this whole, you have to show, the COVID thing to get into the restaurant. I'm like, when is that going to stop? And there's this sense of like, once something becomes patterned and process procedure, does it become permanent? And like, are we being mindful about what we are setting up that could potentially become permanent, and what are the real consequences of that, right? So it is a little bit scary. And there's so many things. Like, I feel like I am living in like the prequel to Handmaid's Tale in so many ways, like on so many levels. I'm like, okay, like, can we step that back a little bit, because that feels a little too close to like heading towards, like bar scan chips, to get in and these sorts of things. So I don't know. Crazy.
It's interesting how anytime I want to hear women compared to Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if it's a show that's so strongly associated with women, but I've seen a few. It's wow. It is wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's based on a book, Margaret Atwood. It's about, this dystopian, world in which basically like women are stripped of all their rights, and then women who can continue to reproduce. There's a disease, there's a virus that causes most women to not be able to carry a child to term. And so the women who are identified as able to reproduce are sectioned off and basically enslaved by the upper echelons, the people who have the people who have the right and the clout and the money and the power to reproduce. And so so we start to like change the genetic pool, because it's like, these are the people who get to have babies, and the handmaids are raped and then impregnated and then give birth, but then the baby is taken away and given, to the wife, to the woman who can't have a child, but is, rich, powerful, upper class, whatever. But what's fascinating about that in the show, it's not so much in the book, but in the show, like the precursor to it getting to that step are these little things like, well, let's just take away this little right. Okay, well, let's just like change that a little bit. Okay, well, let's just say you can't do this piece, things like, oh, you can't have a bank account unless, there's a man on, you just can't, they have to have a man. So, we're not seeing exactly those things, but if we look at some of the stuff that's happening around abortion rights right now, certainly, the idea of being ID'd and needing to have, that in order to gain access to certain things. People one of my clients who's finally, Terrain, in the 5 years that we've been in connection, her greatest source of pain has been relationship. And she's done all this deep, really healing work around, getting herself to the place of like, I'm deserving, I'm worth it, I'm calling in, a really great partner. And she has a really great partner who now has had to leave New York City to go live in Florida because he can't work in New York City because he doesn't want to get the vaccine. And their relationship is stressed. Like, they're close to breaking up because of this. And it breaks. I'm like, oh my God, like how? Like, are you kidding me? Like, you finally found like such a good connection and a good partner, and it might fall apart because we can't get our heads on about what actually needs to happen for people to be, safe. Anyway, I'm on a soapbox now. You go. Your turn.
Yeah, it is different. It is different. And I think many of us will say that there's certain things that are happening that we don't necessarily like. Some people say some things and some people say another thing. What I would say, as going into another year and another time, is that my hope is that, and we touched on this before, as long as we remain close to those important to us,
Yeah.
I don't like the separation, right?
Yeah.
And I don't like the segregation. But I just want us to be happy because if I look at the last 3 years, we went from the Me Too movement to George Floyd to this.
Mm-hmm.
And we touched on this before. There was a point where when I was watching American news, I was looking at the United States, you guys were so united when we saw that incident, right? It didn't matter if you're black, white, pink, purple, green. You guys were in arms, marching together, walking together. Everyone felt a certain pain and everyone wanted society to do better. Then,
Mm-hmm.
gone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I feel bad because, as you mentioned, you have people in relationships that are falling apart now. They say that the divorce, at least in here in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
these are now reasons to divorce, right? Because we are spending so much time around people that we apparently love, only to find out that we don't necessarily like them like we did, like we thought we did.
Mm-hmm.
And that breaks my heart to think that if we're married, you and I, and we spend more time together, we're going to dislike each other more. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're gonna call this like the Debbie Downer episode. Oh my gosh, but it's so real and it has to be talked about because I think what's really true is that your suffering, my suffering, like all the things, going back to that quote, right? The weariness and the idea of like, okay, so what's the antidote? What's the antidote to weariness? What's the antidote to distress? To feeling like there's no end in sight. One of my friends who is an etymologist, I always go to him. I'm like, so when is it going to be done? When's it going to be done? When is it over? And his answers never give me hope. And they're like, well, like 5 years, people will probably. I'm like, oh man. So we've got to figure out how to thrive in this. This is the new normal. And there are things that have to, like, it's tricky because I don't think that we get back to anything, but it's like within the context and the constraints of what is happening around us right now, how do we bring the best parts of ourselves and humanity and relationship and connection and find a way to create space for that, given what's happening in our world right now? I don't have the answer.
We need to thrive and not just survive, right?
Well, yeah, right. And so I think the idea is, okay, if we in our present moment continue to sit in the space of I'm waiting until, then we miss out, right? We miss out on our lives, we miss out on connection. I think that's what a lot of people are in. It's almost like they're just in this little, like, it's like a little bit of stasis. Like, I can't make any decisions. I can't do that. I can't move forward with this until X, Y, or Z, until it's all done, until it's back to normal, until. And I think that's where the trap is. And instead, it's like, this is the circumstance of my life, of the world. And within the context of that circumstance, what are the choices that I'm going to make every day to connect with other human beings, to thrive, to live my life, to not be waiting? Because I think that's a lot of times where maybe that's where some weariness comes in too. Like, you end up just waiting for death because you don't think that there's anything else to do. Yeah.
I agree. It's like when you started your journey. It's like when I started my journey. We could have said that we're going to wait until the stars align and I'm this. No, sometimes you just have to go and do it.
Yeah.
Right? You have to go and you have to walk that path. If you walk it by yourself, you walk it by yourself. Because the beautiful thing when you walk a path is that there's going to be people that's going to join you. Right? It's like when you're going on a road trip and you're like, hey, I want to come along. There's going to be people who's going to fill your car. Right? Even though when you left your house, it probably was just you in that car. But when you got to your destination, your car is full. And I think we need to remember that's how it was, because you raise a good point. We can't just say, well, I'm going to wait until this, because there's two things. one, it may never come. And two, you're just getting older.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like you can pause it and say, I'm going to pause my life, pause the aging process, and just say, I'm going to wait for whenever. You're still getting older. You're still aging. By the time you figure it all out,
yeah,
we've seen what happened. People are dying.
Yeah.
People are losing a lot, right? That person that said in 2018, early 2019, I'll just wait to get a different job. I can ride this one out. And now, similar to probably where you are, and definitely here, those in hospitality services, what do? They ended up on assistance.
Yeah.
So you have to seize the moment now.